The missing patrolman. Ravenswood, a tiny rural town, had a calm evening. The kind of night where the usual symphony of crickets and distant owl hoots seemed muted, swallowed by an unsettling silence, and where the darkness felt thicker. Officer Jack Sullivan was going about his nightly patrol as usual. This was nothing new to him. However, it felt different tonight. Headlights peeked through the pitch-black darkness as Jack's cruiser slid along the deserted roads. The occasional update crackled from the radio, but mostly it was just him and the night. The old dashboard hula girl wobbled with every pothole, and he had a thermos of coffee, the kind that tasted like burnt rubber but kept him alert. Dispatch, Unit 7 here. Everything okay on Pinewood Drive? Leaving for Lakeside, Jack reported, his voice steady against the strange silence that seemed to be encroaching from all directions. He saw something as he turned onto Lakeside Road. A faint flash of light in the distance, resembling a will-o'-the-wisp hovering over the lake. Jack scowled and leaned in to take a closer look. It was unlike any airplane or drone he had ever seen. The way the light danced, it was almost inviting, hypnotic. "I've seen some strange lights over Lakeside, Dispatch," Jack said. "I'm going to check it out," not realizing he was holding onto the steering wheel a bit too tightly. "That's Roger, Unit 7. Proceed with prudence," the static-filled response said. The lights grew brighter and clearer as Jack got closer to the lake, creating unsettling reflections on the surface of the water. Their movements had an unusual cadence, too smooth for anything created by humans. Jack left the headlights on and the engine running as he parked his cruiser. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he stepped outside into the refreshing night air. "Greetings?" he called out, his voice resonating off the water. "Anyone out there?" The sound of the lake gently lapping against the shore was all that was audible. Jack jumped, his heart pounding, as the radio on his shoulder crackled. "Unit 7, how are you doing? Dispatch is still looking into this. This place has some odd lights," Jack said, trying not to stutter. "I'll keep you updated." He moved in the direction of the lake's edge, long, wavy shadows created by the lights reflecting off his uniform. He noticed something even more unsettling as he drew nearer. He could only see vague, shadowy shapes moving slightly outside of his headlight range. They appeared to be ghostly, flickering in and out of existence. "This is the police, whoever you may be. Present yourselves." Even though he could sense the tremor in his own voice, Jack demanded. Abruptly, there was an almost blinding burst of light, much brighter than before. Jack staggered backward as he raised his arm to cover his eyes. He winced as his radio crackled once more, but this time it was just static, a high-pitched whine. The figures in shadow drew nearer, their shapes sharpening but still terrifying as the lights above the lake started to pulse faster and faster. With his flashlight tucked away, Jack tried to break through the gloom, but the feeling of impending doom remained in his stomach. He could finally make out faces, or what should have been faces, as the figures drew closer. They were contorted, turned into faces full of hate and suffering. "Arrest, I require a backup." "There are," Jack's voice trailed off as the radio died, static giving way to a deafening quiet. The dashcam captured Jack's frantic movements, the strange lights flickering menacingly overhead, and the shadowy figures encircling him as the last images it captured. The video then abruptly ended, leaving behind a spooky, reverberating silence. By morning, Jack Sullivan and his patrol car had disappeared, leaving the town haunted by unanswered questions and growing fear, along with the disturbing dashcam footage. Ravenswood was a tense town the morning following the disappearance of Officer Jack Sullivan. The local police department, which typically dealt with small-time crimes and disturbances, was now confronted with a mystery straight out of a horror book. Laura Turner, a 20-year law enforcement veteran, assumed leadership of the inquiry. "Okay, everyone, let's go to work," Laura commanded, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of worry she was unable to completely cover. "We need to find Jack and figure out what happened out there," she said. Jack's partner and closest friend, Deputy Tom Harlow, watched the dashcam video a third time in the hopes of catching something they had missed. It all made no sense, the strange lights, the eerie figures. He stopped the video at the last frame, the ghostly lights illuminating Jack's terrified face. "This is unlike anything we've ever dealt with, Laura. What in the world are those items?" Tom shook his head and muttered. Laura leaned over his shoulder and sighed. "Tom, I'm not sure. However, we must begin somewhere. Let's go investigate the area around the lake. Perhaps we'll uncover some hints." The search party assembled at the lake and began scouring the nearby forests and coastline. Every sound, including the snap of a twig and the rustle of leaves, made them jumpy. They could not shake the images of the dashcam footage and Jack's desperate radio call. Officer Rachel Martinez called out, "Hey, over here," and motioned for the team to move toward a disturbed area close to the water's edge. The grass was brittle and blackened, and the ground was scorched. There were no traces of ash or debris, but it appeared to be the aftermath of a small fire. "How do you interpret this?" With a furrowed brow, Rachel inquired. Laura stooped to run her fingers over the blackened ground. "Something seems to have landed here, or possibly hovered slightly above. However, what?" With his flashlight, Tom peered about, its beam piercing through the shadows of the day. Whatever it was, it quickly departed. Just this, with no footprints or traces. They discovered more odd markings as they searched, including scorched tree branches, an odor of ozone that persisted in the air, and a faint, nearly undetectable hum that made them tense. A shiver went down Laura's spine. This was no longer just a case of a missing person. Much darker forces were at work. Upon returning to the station, they arranged all of their discoveries and attempted to put the puzzle together. The scorched earth, the strange lights, and the unsettling figures all suggested something they couldn't fathom. Laura made the decision to get in touch with Dr. Evelyn Carter, a folklorist and local historian who specialized in the unusual and unexplained. "Evelyn, we require your knowledge." Over the phone, Laura stated, "We have a situation that doesn't fit any normal explanation." Her voice was tight with urgency. "Naturally, Sheriff." Curiosity piqued, Evelyn replied, "I'll be there right away." Evelyn went over the video and the evidence they had gathered when she got there. Her fingers trembled a little as she watched the dashcam video, her face turning pale. Evelyn said quietly, "These lights, the figures, they match descriptions of phenomena that have been reported in this area for centuries. Legends from the past describe the Watchers, entities that descend from the heavens and are frequently signaled by peculiar lights and unexplainable events. These entities are said to be able to take humans and occasionally return them altered." Laura and Tom exchanged a worried look. "Are you claiming that aliens took Jack?" Evelyn answered, "I'm not sure if I'd call them that, but something not of this world, definitely. We have to proceed cautiously with this. If there are Watchers involved, we are dealing with uncontrollable forces." The implications began to sink in, and the atmosphere in the room grew tense. An old mystery that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of their reality was linked to Jack Sullivan's fate. As they dug further, they were unable to get rid of the unsettling sensation that they were being watched, just as Jack had been that fateful night. The group prepared to return under cover of night to the lake with a renewed sense of urgency, hoping to find more information about the Watchers and maybe, just maybe, figure out a way to bring Jack back. Sheriff Laura Turner, Deputy Tom Harlow, and Dr. Evelyn Carter were getting ready to leave Ravenswood and head back to Lakeside as night fell. Under the moonlight, the still waters of the lake and the dark, ominous presence of the forest felt even more menacing. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and an unwavering sense of grim resolve, their goal was to solve the mystery surrounding the Watchers and locate Officer Jack Sullivan. When the group reached the lake, there was a palpably uneasy silence in the air. The moonlight seemed to make the previously burned areas of Earth shimmer, adding to the otherworldly ambience. Evelyn was holding an old book with a leather cover that was full of notes and legend about the Watchers. These stories tell of the Watchers' attraction to energy, both electrical and emotional. Evelyn said, her voice barely audible above a whisper, "We'll need to use a combination of technology and our own heightened states of awareness if we want to make contact." Tom positioned a couple of handheld floodlights around the space, forming a ring of light that just about broke through the suffocating blackness. Laura looked at her radio, the same one that Jack had used, in the hopes that it would offer some clue as to where he had gone. All right, let's disperse while maintaining visual contact with one another. And never forget to remain composed. Laura gave the order. We need to stay as controlled as possible if these things feed off our emotions, even though she could feel the edges of her own nerves fraying. The only sounds as the night grew deeper were the lake's gentle lap and the sporadic rustle of leaves. The hours seemed to go on forever, and just when they thought nothing more could be done, the strange lights appeared once more. Brighter and more intense than before, they hovered over the lake, leaving the water with unsettling reflections. Evelyn whispered, "There they are," her eyes wide with curiosity and fear at the same time. Their bones vibrated as a strange humming filled the air, and the lights started to pulse rhythmically. Abruptly, the temperature dropped, and in the chilly night air, they could see their breath turning into misty clouds. "Remain near," Laura yelled while attempting to maintain a steady tone. Dark shapes started to appear at the periphery of the lit circle as the lights got brighter. They flickered like apparitions, indistinct but unmistakable in their presence. Laura's radio snapped to attention, releasing short bursts of static and excerpts from Jack's desperate final message. "Jack? Can you hear me, Jack?" Laura dialed the radio, holding out hope that someone would answer. The shadows drew nearer, taking on more distinct shapes. They were just shadowy figures with eyes that appeared to glow subtly in the moonlight, lacking any distinguishing features. Evelyn moved forward, brandishing a tiny gadget that gave off a high-pitched sound. She explained, turning on the gadget, "This might draw them in, or at least get their attention." The figures hesitated, nodding heads in apparent listening. Above the lake, the pulsating lights matched the frequency, and the shadows appeared to veer, suspended between two realities. For a split second, Tom thought he saw Jack's face, twisted and deformed with fear, as he pointed his flashlight at one of the figures. "Jack, is that you?" Tom yelled as he approached the figure. The lights above the lake flared brightly as the shadow retreated and blended with the others. The hum intensified to the point of being nearly deafening, and Laura experienced a pressure inside her head as though something was attempting to speak to her mind directly. Her eyes flickered with pictures of Jack, the lake, the watchers, and then blackness. "Everyone, get back up. Retrace your steps." Laura gave an order, her voice just barely audible over the din. The lights went down and the shadows dipped away, vanishing into the darkness as they moved back. Their labored breathing and the sound of rustling leaves were all that remained when the strange humming subsided. At the lake's edge, they regrouped, shook but unwavering. "We must give it another go." "I could sense that we were close," Evelyn remarked, a determined glint shining in her eyes. "Not tonight, please." "We must reorganize and devise an improved strategy," Laura firmly retorted. "But we intend to return. We are due it to Jack." After the night's events, the team went back to the station with their minds racing. Jack was still out there, somewhere between worlds, but they had survived their encounter with the Watchers. One thing became evident to them as they examined their data and made plans for their next course of action. They were dealing with forces that were beyond their comprehension, and the road ahead would be treacherous. Strange happenings in Ravenswood persisted in the weeks that followed, including light sightings, mysterious disappearances, and a pervasive feeling of being watched. The rumors of the Watchers spread like wildfire, making the villagers more cautious. While Laura, Tom, and Evelyn persisted in their search for Jack, they were plagued by the unsettling feeling that the Watchers were constantly keeping an eye on them and waiting for them to make a move. The old police station's ghost. At the intersection of Maple and Fifth, the historic police station stood as a reminder of a different time. Its dilapidated brick walls towered over the neighborhood like a forlorn sentinel. It had lain neglected for years, a silent testament to the passing of time and the mysteries it contained. Legends from the area talked of flickering lights, ghostly appearances, and unsettling noises coming from its depths. After dark, few dared to venture near. There was a mix of excitement and trepidation when the city announced plans to renovate the station and turn it into a community center. With heavy equipment and resolute faces, construction workers arrived eager to give the crumbling building new life. However, strange events soon started to occur. The first person to notice was one of the employees, Mark. It began with a few passing shadows at the periphery of his vision that vanished the moment he looked. He dismissed it, blaming it on exhaustion. Then there were the sounds, muffled voices, footsteps in the distance, that distinct clinking of metal on metal. He claimed to have seen a figure in an old police uniform standing at the end of a dimly lit hallway one evening while working late. The figure disappeared as he got closer, leaving only the sound of its footsteps. Among the crew, word got around quickly. While some dismissed it with humor, making fun of Mark's ghost stories, others weren't so sure. An older employee named Tom, who had a fondness for local history, started to tell his own stories about the station's troubled past. He wiped perspiration from his brow and said, "This place was notorious back in the day. One afternoon, there were some really shady dealings here in the 1940s, according to rumors. You name it. Unexplained disappearances, corrupt law enforcement." Mark was intrigued and a little uneasy, so he looked into it more. He got in touch with Clara, a police historian renowned for her profound understanding of the history of the city's law enforcement. Clara was excited about the possibility of learning long-kept secrets and was more than willing to assist. A disconcerting image started to take shape as they combed through old records and newspaper clippings. The station had been embroiled in a scandal involving multiple high-ranking officers in the early 1940s. The lurid story included bribes, extortion, and even suspected murders. The most startling discovery was that a particularly heinous crime had been covered up, one that had supposedly happened right inside the station. Clara became more and more excited as she learned more information. She exclaimed to Mark, "This could be huge," her eyes bright with excitement at what she had found. If any of this is true, it could help to explain the hauntings. These ghosts might represent the victims or even the dishonest police officers themselves who are unable to find closure. Though he wasn't completely sold, Mark couldn't shake the unsettling vibe that seemed to shroud the station. He lay in bed that night, unable to get the image of the ghostly officer out of his head. He and Clara made the decision to carry out an on-site investigation the following day in the hopes of finding more clues. Clara's voice drifted softly through the dusty halls as she related the stories she had discovered. Abruptly, there was a shiver in the air and the lights flickered. They paused and paid attention. Once more, the sound of slow, purposeful footsteps emerged from the shadows. As Mark peered down the dim corridor, his heart hammered in his chest. "Have you heard it?" Clara uttered a tremulous whisper. Mark tightened his grip on his flashlight and nodded. "Yes, I did hear that." They were motionless as a deafening silence descended upon them. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Mark noticed it. A figure with hollow, piercing eyes watching them while dressed in an antique police uniform. It vanished in an instant, leaving them in the icy, dark grip of fear. With a resolve to carry out their investigation, Mark and Clara made their way back to the former police station while the sun was setting. They entered, carrying notebooks, flashlights, and a general feeling of unease that had descended upon them like a dense mist. The station felt even more deserted because of the thick dust and lingering mildew odor in the air. "Where do we even begin?" Clara questioned, her tone resonating through the vacant walls. Mark said, "Let's check the basement. That's where any hidden documents or hints are likely to be located. Old filing cabinets, abandoned evidence lockers, and mounds of paperwork scattered all over the floor made up the labyrinthine basement." Clara shivered as the temperature dropped dramatically as they descended the creaky stairs. She rubbed her arms and asked, "Do you feel that? This place is freezing." "Yes," Mark answered, illuminating the area with his flashlight. "Let us expedite this." They parted, taking up one side of the room apiece. Searching for something that caught his attention, Mark combed through old documents. With great care, Clara went through old police logs, looking for evidence of the scandal they had discovered. Clara finally triumphantly let out a small cry after what seemed like hours. "Come look at this, Mark." Mark ran to be by her side. She was holding an ancient, leather-bound ledger with aging yellow pages. With excitement in her eyes, Clara clarified, "It's a record book. And take a look at this 1943 entry. It's a list of things that were taken during an internal investigation." Mark took a closer look at the fading ink. "Perhaps this is it," he exclaimed. experiencing an adrenaline rush. We may have hard evidence of the corruption if we can locate these items. With newfound vigor, they started searching the basement using the descriptions from the ledger. In one of the storage rooms, they found a small, locked cabinet hidden behind a false wall. With the force of Mark's crowbar, the rusted lock finally broke. They discovered a variety of personal belongings inside, including jewelry, wallets, and even a bloodstained badge. Clara meticulously categorized every object, her enthusiasm subdued by the somberness of their finding. Clara pointed to the badge and said, "This belongs to Officer James Callahan. Records state that he vanished in 1943, around the time of the controversy." Mark scowled. Gone? Or was purposefully made invisible? As they became aware of the ramifications, the tension in the room increased. These weren't just objects. They were proof of offenses, potentially even murders, that the very people who were sworn to protect the law had covered up. Mark's flashlight flickered as they prepared to leave, leaving the walls with long, shifting shadows. Clara saw a shape moving in the shadows, and her eyes widened. "Mark, be careful," she exclaimed. Just in time, Mark turned to see Officer Callahan's spectral form appear from the darkness, his face contorted into an angry and hurt expression. The air seemed to throb with a sinister energy as the temperature continued to drop. "Who are you?" Mark asked, trembling slightly. The ghost didn't say anything. Rather, it gave Clara's badge a translucent finger point before fading away and disappearing into the stifling silence that filled the room. Clara looked visibly shook. "Mark, this area is a cemetery. The injustice done to these spirits has kept them imprisoned here." Mark nodded, his thoughts whirling. "We must make this public. Perhaps we can bring them some peace if we can reveal what transpired." Holding the ledger and the things they had discovered, they departed the station with a renewed sense of purpose. It was up to them to discover the truth because the ghosts of the past were more real than ever. The station loomed behind them, a somber reminder of the work still to be done, as they emerged into the waning daylight. The next day, when Mark and Clara returned with a local journalist named Rebecca, the old police station seemed even more ominous. Clara had reached out to her, believing that their best chance of quelling the spirit's agitation was to reveal the truth to the public via the media. Rebecca agreed to assist in recording their findings despite her skepticism and interest in the historical context. "Regarding this, are you certain?" When they got closer to the door, Rebecca inquired. "The stories seem unbelievable, but I've heard them." "You will eventually," Mark retorted somberly before guiding the way inside. The station welcomed them with its customary aloofness, the oppressive ambience nearly palpable. They returned to the basement, where the evidence was kept out of sight. Rebecca took notes and pictures while Clara described their findings, her skepticism gradually giving way to a mounting sense of unease. Abruptly, there was a sharp drop in temperature and a faint echo of footsteps in the space. Rebecca's eyes grew wide when she noticed a ghostly officer with a sorrowful expression suddenly appear in front of them. Once more, it was Officer Callahan, gesturing to the cabinet containing his badge. "This is him," murmured Clara. "He's attempting to speak." Rebecca gulped hard and trembled a little in her hands. "How do we proceed?" Mark declared, "We have to show the world what happened here. Justice is due to these spirits." They put together a thorough report with Rebecca's assistance, exposing the corruption and cover-up that had afflicted the station in the 1940s. The contents of the cabinet and Clara's historical research provided a graphic picture of institutionalized abuse and homicide. Rebecca pledged to release the narrative along with supporting documentation and Mark and Clara's testimonies. Having finally had their story told, the three of them made the decision to spend the night in the station, with the intention of bringing some peace to the spirits. They made their temporary camp among the relics of a haunted past in the main office as darkness descended upon the structure. The hours went by in tense silence. The loud bang that reverberated through the halls interrupted them as they were about to fall asleep, their flashlights sweeping the room as they jolted to consciousness. Officer Callahan reappeared in the afterlife, but this time he wasn't by himself. Several other apparitions, victims of the station's sinister past, stood beside him. The spirits appeared relieved and angry at the growing cold in the room. Mark moved forward and displayed the badge. "We are aware of what transpired. We'll see to it that others are informed as well." The ghosts appeared to shimmer, taking on more distinct shapes. They gave one collective nod, then gradually vanished, leaving a profound silence in their wake. Rebecca let out a long breath. Have we done it?" With tears in her eyes, Clara nodded. "I believe that. They've been taken into consideration." Rebecca's article made headlines over the course of the following few days, inciting a wave of public outrage and a fresh look into the history of the former police station. The city council unveiled plans to honor the victims and guarantee that injustices of this nature would never be overlooked. Mark and Clara, for their part, carried on with their work, motivated by the realization that their efforts had had an impact. The former police station started to change from a place of terror and hopelessness to one of justice and restoration. Even though the ghosts had vanished from view, their presence could still be felt, serving as a constant reminder that the truth would eventually come to light regardless of how long it was hidden. The cursed evidence. The routine call to look into a disturbance at an old apartment building on the outskirts of town was the beginning of it all. Officers Nguyen and Markham were dispatched to the scene together. Strange calls were nothing new to them, but something about this one felt off the bat. The structure towered above them, its windows shattered and dark. Markham took the lead with his flashlight in hand, and Nguyen trailed closely behind with his gun out. Inside, the stale hallways held an unsettling silence, and the air was heavy with dust. They saw strange symbols painted on the walls in what appeared to be dried blood as they ascended the creaking stairs to the top floor. A shiver went down Markham's spine, but he ignored it as they got closer to the apartment where the disturbance had been reported. The door was open, softly swaying in the wind. Carefully, they pushed it open to reveal a scene out of a nightmare. The space was a disorganized jumble of shattered glass and overturned furniture. A jumble of strange artifacts lay in the center, surrounded by strewn pages of handwritten notes and candles that had burned to stubs. Nguyen cursed quietly to himself. "What on earth is this?" Markham took a while to respond. His attention was drawn to the artifacts, which included a small stone idol with strange features, an elaborate dagger, and a worn tome bound in leather that gave off a soft, ethereal glow. In a tense voice, Markham finally said, "Looks like some occult stuff. We ought to gather these up as proof." They tried not to touch the artifacts as they meticulously gathered them. Markham felt that they were tampering with something far beyond their comprehension as he reached for the tome. Back at the precinct later that evening, they recorded the artifacts as evidence. The objects in the room seemed to emanate a sinister aura, lending the atmosphere a weighty feel. Stranger things began to happen over the course of the next few days. Officer Nguyen described having intense nightmares about being pursued by eerie figures down dimly lit hallways. Even though Markham didn't remember hurting himself, he noticed strange scratches on his skin that appeared overnight. Then the news arrived, chilling Markham to his core. Officer Nguyen's body was discovered dead in his apartment, horrifyingly twisted as though he had been twisted from the inside out. Markham struggled with grief and guilt as he attended Nguyen's funeral. He had the unshakable impression that something awful had been let loose by their discovery at the apartment. He realized that the artifacts had to be cursed. Unable to sleep that night, Markham spent hours going through the notes that had been taken from the scene. They were full of meanderings about calling forth a strong force, a creature that was enslaved to the artifacts as vessels and ravenous for souls. A sick feeling descended into Markham's gut as he read. That's when he realized that whatever they discovered was far from finished. Now that it knew it was free, the evil force was seeking more than just souls. It desired retribution, and Markham had let it loose into their world without realizing. Markham's paranoia increased in the days after Officer Nguyen's death. It seemed like every shadow moved and twisted when he wasn't looking. In the darkness, he began to hear faint but unmistakably sinister whispers. His coworkers saw the shift in him. He withdrew and jumped at the first noise. There were rumors that he was going insane due to guilt over Nguyen's passing. Markham got a call one evening from a private collector who had heard rumors about the artifacts. Mr. Blackwood, the collector, was willing to buy them even though Markham had warned him about their curse. Markham reluctantly consented to meet Mr. Blackwood in an impartial setting, a dimly lit cafe outside of town. Markham could not get rid of the sensation that someone was watching him while he waited. In the bag at his feet, the relics weighed a lot. Upon his arrival, Mr. Blackwood was a tall, slender man with eyes that seemed to pierce right through Markham's soul. Despite their polite conversation, Markham could feel a tension beneath the surface. Mr. Blackwood stated, "I'm willing to offer you a fair price for the artifacts," in a silky voice. "I am aware of their standing." Markham paused, running his fingers along the bag's edge. "I doubt that you comprehend. These items carry a risk. They are doomed." Mr. Blackwood gave a quiet laugh. "Oh, Officer Markham, I promise you that I fully comprehend. I am aware of their potential, though. Their power can be utilized if the proper safety measures are taken." A twinge of unease crossed Markham's mind, but he was forced to consider the offer by fear and guilt. In order to separate himself from the terror the artifacts had unleashed, he had to get rid of them. Markham observed a subtle shift in Mr. Blackwood's demeanor during their negotiation. A predatory hunger glowed in his eyes, sending a chill down Markham's back. A ruckus broke out outside the cafe before they could seal the deal. Mr. Blackwood and Markham looked up, alarmed, as screams resounded through the darkness. Markham peered through the window and saw dark shapes moving quickly, their forms vague but unmistakably sinister. With a draw of his gun, Markham commanded Mr. Blackwood to stay here before storming outside. He was met with chaos as terrified bystanders ran from dark figures that darted among them like wolves among sheep. Markham shot into the shadows, but the shots appeared to go through the figures harmlessly. With a curse, his heart thumping, he retreated. The murmurs inside his head became more insistent, making fun of him and teasing him with threats of suffering. Markham was about to give up when he heard a familiar voice calling out to him from the alley next to the cafe. It was Nguyen's voice, distinctly real despite being soft and far away. "Markham, Bolt, keep from being taken too." Markham froze, caught halfway between hope and disbelief. Nguyen had seen his own twisted body, so there was no way he could still be alive. Still, the voice insisted, pleading with him to run. Markham took one last look at the mayhem that had taken over the street before deciding what to do. Ignoring Mr. Blackwood's cries from behind, he turned and ran. He ran until he was certain he had left the cursed artifacts and their evil entity far behind, until his lungs burned and his legs felt like they would collapse. But even as he passed out and crumpled against a chilly brick wall, Markham knew in his heart that the nightmare was far from over. Weeks passed since Markham's harrowing encounter at the cafe. He had tried to put the events behind him, burying himself in work and avoiding anything related to the cursed artifacts. Yet, the nightmares persisted, each more vivid and terrifying than the last. One rainy night, Markham received a call from an old friend and fellow officer, Detective Ramirez. Ramirez had been assigned to investigate a series of bizarre deaths linked to occult symbols found at each crime scene. The details chilled Markham to the bone. It was the same symbols they had discovered in the apartment. Reluctantly, Markham agreed to meet Ramirez at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The rain fell in heavy sheets as he arrived, casting a dreary veil over the already desolate surroundings. Inside the dimly lit motel room, Ramirez spread out grim photos and notes detailing the deaths. Each victim had suffered horrifically, their bodies contorted in unnatural poses as if caught in the throes of a terrible agony. "There's something evil at work here," Ramirez muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We traced it back to those artifacts you found, the ones that went missing from evidence." Markham felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "They're still out there? After everything?" Ramirez nodded gravely. "We think someone is using them, trying to harness their power. But it's backfiring, people are dying, and we can't track down who's behind it." As they talked, Markham noticed a faint scratching sound coming from outside the room. Ramirez didn't seem to notice, but Markham's senses were on high alert. He approached the window cautiously, peering through the rain-streaked glass into the darkness beyond. There, standing in the shadows across the parking lot, was Mr. Blackwood. His eyes gleamed with a malicious intensity that froze Markham's blood. Without a word, Blackwood turned and disappeared into the night. "We have to stop him," Markham said, his voice urgent. He's connected to all of this. Ramirez hesitated, clearly torn. Markham, we're outgunned here. We don't even know what we're dealing with. But Markham was resolute. He couldn't let fear or uncertainty stop him now, not after everything he had seen and experienced. With Ramirez reluctantly agreeing to back him up, they set out to track down Mr. Blackwood and confront the malevolent force that had been unleashed. Their pursuit led them deep into the heart of the city, through abandoned warehouses and forgotten alleys. The rain continued to fall, a relentless drumbeat that echoed their growing sense of dread. Finally, they cornered Mr. Blackwood in an old warehouse on the edge of town. He stood before a makeshift altar, surrounded by the cursed artifacts arranged in a sinister pattern. His eyes burned with a fanatical zeal as he chanted in a language that sent shivers down Markham's spine. "Stop!" Markham shouted, gun raised. Ramirez stood beside him, equally tense and prepared for whatever might happen next. Mr. Blackwood turned slowly, a malevolent smile spreading across his face. "Ah, Officer Markham, so good of you to join us. But I'm afraid it's too late." With a sudden movement, Blackwood grabbed the dagger from the altar and plunged it into his own chest. Markham and Ramirez watched in horror as his body convulsed, dark energy swirling around him like a vortex. The warehouse shook violently, debris falling from the ceiling as the air filled with an otherworldly scream. Markham struggled to maintain his grip on reality as the malevolent entity manifested before them, a shadowy mass of writhing tendrils and piercing red eyes. "We have to destroy the artifacts," Ramirez shouted over the cacophony of chaos. Markham nodded, heart pounding. Together, they opened fire on the cursed objects, bullets tearing through the ancient tome, shattering the idol, and reducing the dagger to twisted metal. With each blow, the entity shrieked in agony, its form flickering and dissipating like smoke in the wind. As the last artifact was destroyed, the warehouse fell silent. Markham and Ramirez stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily as they surveyed the aftermath of their battle. "It's over," Ramirez said quietly, relief and exhaustion evident in his voice. But Markham knew better. He had stared into the face of true evil, and he knew it wouldn't be so easily vanquished. As they left the warehouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in the shadows beyond their sight, the malevolent entity still lingered, a reminder of the darkness that lurks within the artifacts, waiting for another unsuspecting soul to set it free. And Markham vowed that he would be ready, should that day ever come.